Over the years, developer Rockstar Games has put out a number of titles that have consistently pushed the boundaries of video game open worlds, and as the studio's worlds became more and more organic, so did its characters evolve significantly. The slew of professional criminals that populate most of the studio's titles are all figures that stand out thanks to their personalities and deeds, but among them, Red Dead Redemption 2's Arthur Morgan manages to portray an outlaw with a surprising amount of human qualities, making him Rockstar's best protagonist to date. As Red Dead Redemption 2 begins, Arthur Morgan is a rather unassuming outlaw caught in a bad situation. The gang he belongs to is on the run from the law after a severely botched job and finds itself trapped in the mountains by winter. It's not long, however, until his determination and loyalty to the gang quickly reveals itself as he eagerly does his part to ensure that they all make it out of that rough spot. It's not a first impression that blows minds by any means, but like most things in Red Dead Redemption 2, the unveiling of Arthur's character arc is a slow burn that pulls the right punches at exactly the right times. Going into the story proper, Arthur's range of preoccupations diversify, including more activities fit for an outlaw such as robbing trains or coaches and stealing horses. The empathetic, if somewhat rough, helping hand shows his true colors, tackling all these tasks with ease and familiarity born from a life of encountering them. Where Dutch van der Linde is a charismatic leader that often reads and allows himself to dream a better future for the gang, Arthur is he who does and aware of where he stands morally at all times. The tight-knit Van der Linde gang is another of Red Dead Redemption 2's stars, a group of outlaws that behaves more like a family, enduring hardships and thriving together. Their many chats, whether at the crack of dawn or in the evening by the campfire, showcase varied personalities, a large number of interactions, and a surprising array of human emotions. Charles Smith provides a calm counterbalance to the gang's more explosive personalities and partakes in its robberies, but not without forgetting his Native American side, tracking down poachers that wantonly kill buffaloes and ending them on sight. Mrs. Grimshaw acts as the gang's motherly figure, chiding Arthur if he goes long periods without contributing funds to the camp, but also falling prey to her own insecurities when she sees a younger member admiring herself in the mirror. From surprisingly lucid takes on their failures and successes to tall tales, bouts of anger but also partying, the Van der Linde gang's camp feels more human than any city or town in Red Dead Redemption 2, in spite of always being found far from civilization in secluded spots under the stars. Arthur is very much part of this group and, as the story progresses and hardships multiply, his complex personality blooms. Curious players can get early glimpses at this process from his journal, which contains quite a few inner thoughts in which he doubts the gang's approach to obtaining that mythical big score that frees them all, muses on his place in the world, and shows glimmers of humanity when recounting the past. On the whole, Arthur and the gang's situation is precarious, with civilization showing clear disdain for people like them and ramping up efforts to snuff them out. Between railroad and oil magnates, the government, Pinkertons, and local law forces, there are many who want their heads on a platter. While Dutch's ideals of getting rich and obtaining freedom elsewhere perpetually illustrate the growing clash of worlds, Arthur and the others in the camp find themselves longing for the days of old where their kind could thrive. In between plans and big robberies that constantly get derailed, Arthur not only shows the ability to think clearly and question Dutch's methods the further he slips from his principles of killing those in need of killing and helping those in need of help, but also a potential strength of maintaining his honorable nature in the face of adversity. This contrast becomes gradually sharper over the course of the story, especially if the player aims for honorable conduct. Main side quests and random encounters throughout the world give the player a choice of making Arthur a helpful individual or turning him into a fierce outlaw that misses no opportunity to rob and kill. Recovering someone's horse, giving a wounded traveler medicine, or saving a kidnapped stranger only to drown them yourself initially just seem to be actions that add honorable or dishonorable points to an abstract, gamey meter. However, as Red Dead Redemption 2 pulls its greatest twist, all these choices begin to feed into something greater. The signs of Arthur's degrading health are subtly spread throughout the first 4 acts. Unless you're fairly attentive, you can go through them without noticing the occasional hoarse coughs Arthur lets out during or after finishing missions, or attributing them to fatigue and sleeping rough. And then, out of the blue, breathing becomes harder and St. Denis's streets get soaked in a haze as Arthur stumbles towards the nearest doctor. The hard-hitting diagnosis hits players like a hammer but doesn't take down the experienced outlaw on the spot. But tuberculosis in a time when a cure is pretty much out of the question ends up contributing to a shift in Arthur's perspective. There is some eerily poetic justice in how the disease is contracted as well. Arthur gets it while beating up a debtor that's suffering from it. I don't quite recall another video game burdening the main character with a progressive disease and making sure it impacts the story without frustrating the player quite in the same way as Rockstar did in Red Dead Redemption 2. The only other example that comes to mind is Far Cry 2, but there, malaria was more of an occasional mechanical nuisance than anything else. Arthur may only black out a couple of times, but his appearance changes to reflect the disease, while coughing becomes more frequent as his business with the gang develops at an increasingly frantic pace that's only set to doom him. But aside from showing that even one with rough edges such as Arthur can be turned fragile in an instant by disease, tuberculosis also leads to more reflection on his part. What was previously an action reserved for occasional short exchanges and journal entries, which act as a means of direct communication to the player, revealing an occasionally sensitive side of Arthur's that would serve no purpose in his day-to-day activity, becomes more commonplace, Arthur opening up to a few characters and realizing that perhaps there is a sliver of redemption to be earned with death closing in. As Dutch van der Linde leaves behind the principles that fueled the gang's pursuits, misled by Rockstar's most despicable character, so does the family shatter, its members either leaving or dying. But more interesting is Arthur's place in all this, following Dutch to the very bitter end despite showing signs of disillusionment from fairly early on. A good portion of the final act sees Arthur easily predicting the eventual failures of his once mentor, but nonetheless still going through with helping Dutch. As a player, it's hard to not feel the inherent tension as you follow Dutch into insane murder sprees that not only use the remnants of the dwindling local Native American population for his own benefit, but also pit a wanted gang against the US Army itself. But it's not just blind loyalty that's pushing Arthur onward. With his dedication to Dutch's plans in tatters and faith in the one's mentor lost, Arthur rides to simply help as many of those he considers close as possible. He's there when Sadie Adler settles the score with the O'Driscolls, he encourages Trelawney to leave, and he kicks out the debt-collecting Strauss, not because he indirectly brought death's spectre upon himself, but due to how, in his fragile state, Arthur can glean the human element behind all the greed of the admittedly legal action of reclaiming debts. Most of the people taking loans don't manage to make the money back in time, and where previously he knocked out an alcoholic father and took his worried son's saving without flinching, he not only absolves the debts of the final two debtors, but can also help them with some of his own money should the player choose so. Arthur saving John Marston, who he didn't always like, is, however, his largest attempt at redemption. As Dutch's final plans reach their boiling point and the law encroaches more and more on remaining gang members, Arthur candidly lets John know that the time for loyalty is gone and he should do what he can to save himself alongside the wife and child to whom he never got close to. Without a doubt, Arthur's failed relationship plays into this, wishing John gets to have the life that he regrets repeatedly kicking away. And in the final moments, when the gang is no more and with Pinkertons on their tail, Arthur sacrifices himself to save John. To an external observer, Arthur's fate may ultimately seem tragic. He never manages to bring justice to the man ratting on the gang, and he never puts Dutch back on the right path or in a grave. Brilliantly, Rockstar Games subverts expectations, replacing a final duel against those who wronged Arthur with a strained fistfight in which he always ends up on the ground, weakened by the beating and tuberculosis, and crawling towards his ultimate demise. It's here where Red Dead Redemption 2 masterfully weaves its gamey honor system in the actual events one last time. If dishonorable, Arthur's fate is sealed by a knife to the throat and a stab in the back, or a point-blank shot to the head as he tells Micah the Inciter that they're both horrible men. If honorable, Arthur gets to watch the sunrise, dying alone and peacefully after having done all he could to obtain personal redemption. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a monumental achievement on Rockstar's part, which once again proves that the studio is not only capable of creating the most compelling and authentic open worlds, but also that it understands how to build a story and characters without resorting to the clichés AAA titles usually employ to tug on players' heartstrings. Instead of a forced romance and 180-degree morality turns, Arthur stands out precisely because he owns up to how he lived his life, acknowledging his attempt to change or his failure to do so, but never claiming either can hope to wash his existing flaws and sins. In the best ending, he dies on a mountain as the sun rises, and in that bright dawn of a new world, free of outlaws as the Wild West knew them, Arthur succumbs to disease without being fully absolved by anyone, but knowing that his final sacrifice went beyond himself, ensuring that the only man who still had a shot at a normal life gets another chance.